Chapter 9. Tellings of the Wheel. Ran's heart was pounding as he ran, staring in dismay at the barren hills. He looked over his shoulder but saw no sign of his pursuers, only hearing the howls and guttural voices of the Trollocs. In his haste he found himself at the top of a knife-edged ridge, and dropped to his knees with a groan. Looking down at a 1,000-foot drop, he saw a swirling fog with fires and lightning flashing. From the centre of the mist rose a huge black mountain he'd never seen before, yet somehow Rand recognised it. He feels drawn to the mountain, despite the sense of desolation it emanates. He feels it physically pulling at him. Fighting the pull leaves Rand feeling drained, tears running down his face. His mind fills with anger and he clings to it like a lifeline. "Serve me," a voice whispers in his mind. It was familiar. "Serve me." Rand shook his head, refusing the demand. "Serve me." Shaking his fist at the mountain, Rand shouts, "The light consume you, Shaitan!" Abruptly, he's surrounded by the smell of death, and a figure looms over him in a cloak the colour of dried blood. Rand didn't want to see his face or even think of it. As a hand reached toward him, Rand threw himself backward. He fell, flailing at the air, wanting to scream yet glad to get away. Suddenly, he was no longer falling, and Rand finds himself standing on the brown grass of a rolling plain. In the distance is a huge single mountain, its peak broken and split. But this one brought no fear or despair. A broad river flows past it with an island city such as he might hear of in a gleeman's tale. It was encircled by high, shining white walls, and Rand began to head toward it, feeling he could find safety within. Drawing closer, he can make out the soaring towers and bridges spanning the river to the city. A sudden chill in his bones alerts him, and without looking back he flees. Freezing fingers brush his back, tugging at his cloak, and he knew it was the figure. The harder and faster he ran, the further the city seemed to recede, until he wants to howl in frustration. He trips and falls. "No!" he screams, then grunts as he hits the paving stones, and standing finds himself within the city. He marvels at the colourful, smiling people who walk past him. Some speak to him, but he cannot understand their speech, but he feels that he should. Mingling with the crowd, he wanders the city. Turning a corner, he's faced with the sight of a huge white tower that he knew offered the safety he sought. But he wants to explore more first. A delay wouldn't hurt. Yet no matter which direction he took, it always brings him to the tower. The people in the streets are pleading with him to go to the tower, and he surrenders to them. The people begin to sing and dance so joyfully that Rand joins in. The crowd sweeps him along the steps of the tower, and he enters through the double doors. They slam closed behind him, and a murderer steps forward, hissing,
"We've been waiting for you."
Rand wakes with a start, soaked in sweat and gasping for breath. He can see that Tam is still asleep and someone has been in to tend the fire. He wonders if there would be any consequences to naming the Dark One whilst in a dream. He was starving. Finding the tray had been replaced with warm, fresh food, he gulps down the meal. As he touches his father's forehead, checking for fever, Tam opens his eyes, saying, "When Marin told me I'd been sick, I'd hoped it was just a dream, but at least you're safe. How's the farm?" Taking a deep breath, Rand tells him, "The Trollocs killed all the sheep and trashed the house. We were luckier than some, though. They burnt half the village." Rand tells him of his return to the farm and the Trolloc he'd killed, Nynaeve saying that he was going to die, going to the Aes Sedai to heal him, and what she'd told him. He said nothing about his father's fever ramblings, though. Tam says, "What would Trollocs or the Dark One want with you boys?" Rand asks him, "Do you think she was lying?" Rand confirmed everything she said about the attack was true. Tam pauses, then says, "Tell me what she said. Her exact words, mind you." Rand told him to the best of his memory, and Tam explains, "Aes Sedai are tricksome. They don't lie, not right out, but the truth an Aes Sedai tells you is not always the truth you think. Take care around her." He then tells Rand he should be going with them. The world outside is very different from the Two Rivers. Rand says, "I thought you tried to talk me out of going." And Tam answers, "If Trollocs are after you, lad, you'd be safer in Tar Valon. Just remember that Aes Sedai do things for their own reasons, and they're not always the reasons you think. Listen sharp, think deep, and guard your tongue. If you tell Lan anything, you've as good as told Moiraine. He won't keep secrets from her." Ran knew little about the warder bond between Aes Sedai and their warders. He knew that warders got all sorts of benefits, healing more quickly, going longer without food, drink or sleep. Supposedly they could sense shadow spawn if close enough, which would explain their attempt to warn the village of the attack. Ran tells him that Moiraine warned him he needs weeks of bed rest, and that Mistress Alvia is going to enforce it. Tam asks when he leaves. "Tonight?" Ran nods, and Tam says that if he can get past Marin, he'll see if he can catch up to them on the road. Lan pops his head around the door, warning Ran to finish saying his goodbyes. There may be trouble, so hurry. Tam tells Ran to keep the sword. He'll probably have need of it. Lan returns and practically drags Rand out of the room, saying they need to hurry. Matt is waiting outside the room, carrying his bow and quiver. They follow Lan downstairs to the door of the inn and see Moiraine facing down a crowd of angry villagers. Coplins, congers and Sen Bui at the front. They shout out for her to leave Emond's Field. They don't want Aes Sedai and their troubles in the Two Rivers. Dal Coplin then threatens to burn her out if she doesn't leave, bringing the crowd to silence. Suddenly, Bran and Master Lewin were there, the mayor asking if someone suggested burning down his inn. He's met with denials, so Bran tells them, "I'm surprised at you people. Patar Kar, your boy's leg was broken last night, but today he's walking. Because of her. Ewed Canwyn, you had a gash down your back until she laid her hands on you. And you, Sen, your arm was hanging useless. A massive burns if not for her." Sen tells Bran that he can't deny her aid, but if the Trollocs didn't come because of her, then why did they? He was followed by more calls of not wanting Aes Sedai in the village from the crowd. Moiraine steps forward with her staff spinning, flames spouting from both ends, and calls out, "Is this what Aemon's blood has come to? Little people squabbling for the right to hide like rabbits? You've forgotten who you were. I'd hoped some part was left." Bran tells her they are who they've always been, honest farmers, shepherds and craftsmen. Two Rivers folk. Moiraine tells the crowd, "To the south is what you call the White River, but some men still call it by its true name, Mnetharendrel, old tongue for waters of the mountain home. 2,000 years ago it flowed past a magnificent mountain city. The land of this nation covered this entire region, and its people called it Mnetherin, the mountain home. Their king was Aemon Alcar Althorin, and his queen was Eldrine Aellen Acarlan. The greatest compliment back then was to say someone had Aemon's heart due to his courage. Weep if you have a heart for the loss of them, for their memory and their blood. For nearly 200 years the Trolloc Wars had ravaged the world, and wherever the battles raged the Red Eagle banner of Mnetherin flew. The men of Mnetherin were a thorn in the Dark One's foot. Sing of Mnetherin, the sword that could not be broken. The army was far away on the fields of Becca, when news came that a Trolloc army was heading to their home. Too far it seemed for them to do anything but wait word of their land's death and mourn. Without thought of the distance they marched from their victory. Day and night they travelled, for they had seen the horrors of a Trolloc army left behind. When the Dark One's army reached their lands, the men of Mnetherin stood before them, their backs against the Tarandral River. Trollocs, Dark Friends, Myrddraal and Dreadlords blackened the land and flew the banner of Baalzamon. Aemon had sent out messengers and was told that if he could hold for 3 days at the Tarandral, aid would come. Somehow they held, and by the 3rd day the land was a butcher's yard. By the 4th day no help had come, yet still they fought, and on the 10th day Aemon knew he'd been betrayed, and they could stand no longer. They crossed the Tarandral, breaking the bridges after them. Aemon sent out word for his people to flee, and now the soldiers fought to buy them time to escape. In the city, Eldrine organised the evacuation into the deepest parts of the mountains. Yet many did not flee. Men and women marched to join the army, every one of them knowing they would not survive. Their final stand was here, which you now call Emond's Field, and the sword that could not be broken was shattered. Eldrine felt the moment Aemon died, and in her grief she pulled on the true source, seeking vengeance for her people, and she hurled the one power at the Trolloc army. Dreadlords and Shadowspawn died where they stood, consumed in the fire that swept through the masses. Those that survived fled, to later be cut down by armies of other lands. Eldrine had drawn so much of the one power, She was consumed by her own fire, which also claimed the city of the mountain home. Yet the children and their minders hidden in the mountains survived. There was nothing left, but they stayed and rebuilt. The land had been paid for with their parents' blood, and they would keep it. Weep for Manethrin, which is lost forever. The fire on her staff winked out, and there was stunned silence in the crowd. Paetal Kar pushed forward, saying, "I know thorn in the Dark One's side, but my will is walking because of you, and for that I'm ashamed to be here. You can stay in Emmons Field as long as you like." Others began muttering apologies and walking off after Pate. Lan grabs the boys, telling them it's time to go. As the pair follow the warder toward the stable, Ran tries to convince himself that this is the start of a grand adventure. Thanks for listening. Please like, share and subscribe and help get a new channel off the ground. Thank you.